And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the fantastic Jan, who's going to be speaking to us this morning, sharing her thoughts and words to us. So without further ado, I will pass over to Jan. But before we do, I want to just pray for her quickly. Father, I pray for Jan now, that she would have the boldness to speak the words out that you have given her. And I pray more than that, that we would have the hearts and ears to be able to hear what you have to say to us individually this morning. In your name, Jesus. Amen.
Me to you. Oh, my goodness. I was very emotional, wasn't it? Never mind about seeing Alan topless. It was like just everything else. I was holding back the tears. Just wonderful. So, just so grateful to be here this morning for this amazing dedication and just celebration of what God is going to do and is doing. So I feel like just kind of like want to bottle this morning really, and then kind of just, maybe get the bottle out and open it up if I'm feeling a bit down. So yeah, Paradar, good morning. So good to be here. So today we are carrying on our series on Dangerous Wonder, which is pretty much based on this book. I'm covering 2 chapters, so I'm not going to cover 2 chapters. If anybody wants the book and hasn't got a copy, then it's yours, you can take it. I've read it. So put your hands up, come and see me after, you can take that. You're going to need to, because I'm not covering everything. So, today we're talking about wide-eyed listening and irresponsible, irresistible passion. Irresponsible passion. If you want to know why the passion is irresponsible, you need to read the book. But I wanted to start with a Bible verse. I usually have lots of Bible verses. This is the one for today. So you need to make the most of it, savour it, read it, because we're just really focusing on this word from Romans 8. And it says, "This resurrection life you received from God is not a timid, grave-tending life. It's adventurously expectant, greeting God with a childlike, 'What's next, Papa?' God's Spirit touches our spirits and confirms who we really are." And this series, we've been talking about what faith in Jesus is like. We've been talking about what does it look like, our faith, and we've been focusing on our faith and our walk with Jesus being adventurous and expectant. And living so close to Jesus in like that dangerous proximity to Jesus where we're so close to him that quite honestly anything could happen. And Alan talked about having a Christianity and a walk with God that impacts our life so much it ruins our life. And he used that word ruin to describe the roller coaster ride with God, where you're buckling in and you're saying to God, what's next? What's next? And that faith starts somewhere. That walk with God starts somewhere. Now, if I said to you this morning the word church, what would be the first word that comes to mind? And if I said, John's smiling, to worry, building, thank you. And if I said to you God, what would be the first word that comes to mind? Father God, fantastic. I suspect that most of you, or none of you, didn't think of the word passion. Often when we think of the church, we don't think of passion. We're a bit worried that a church that sounds passionate might kind of even be a little bit extreme or cultish, and we don't want any of that, do we? And we often don't think of God as being passionate. It's said that God created us in his image, but many of us, we've created God in our image. He isn't an Englishman. Sorry guys, he's not Welsh either. God is incredibly passionate. And there's a passion in his heart for us today. And the reason we want this adventurous God, the only way that we can follow after God and know that adventure is to know his passion. And there is this passion in his heart to you today, and it is turned towards you. And God is not lukewarm, and he is not disinterested, and he is not far away. He's just full of love. And it's like this burning, deep, passionate love. And he loves us so much, and he is so passionate about us that he took action to remove everything that separates us from him. All of the shame, all of our failure, all of our sin, all of the rubbish that life throws at us, everything that would stop us knowing the fullness of a relationship with God, Jesus took that when he died on the cross. He took that so that everything that separates us from him would be removed. And that is such good news. That is so, so good. And it's because of God's passion, it's because of the passion of God that's why he did that. Does that sound good to you this morning? If you want some of that, if you want some of that passion, and I feel like I could go and sit down now, but if you want some of that passion that God has for you, you just have to ask. And if you want to ask anybody here today, we will pray with you, we will help you, we will get alongside you. But I just didn't want to let the moment go without telling you that God has done everything he can to bring you into relationship with himself, and he wants you to know him as that passionate, loving, amazing Father. And the thing about passion is it's not always quiet, is it? If you want to know about passion not being quiet, you want to watch football with my husband. We've had to apologise to many a neighbour and many a crying child. Passion isn't quiet, is it? It's not it's often not conservative. It's often a bit kind of out there. And you know, I felt like God wanted us to know that there's room in the church for passion, that there's room in the church for people that look and behave differently as well. I was thinking the other day about diversity and how God is so diverse and how he loves to do amazing things. It's like hundreds of types of beetle, isn't there? And there's hundreds of species of spider. And I'm like, why would God do that? Why would it be necessary to have so many different types of spiders and beetles and nasty things? But that's because the diversity of God. And I just wanted to say this morning, you know, that you are really welcome here. If you don't sound or look like other people, that's fine. You're really welcome here. That everybody is welcome just as they are. And I also wanted to mention a verse in Samuel when David was dancing. And David was a king who was really passionate about God. He was described as being a man after God's heart. And he was dancing one time, and he was worshipping before God. And Michal, who was was the daughter of Saul, and she criticised his dancing. And she said that he was not being dignified and he was not behaving with decorum. And David had this to say. He said, "It was before the Lord that I danced. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes." And that is such a challenge, isn't it? Because I like to be dignified. I don't want to do anything too passionate or I like to just fit in. We all want to fit in, don't we? But when we follow Jesus, we need to be prepared, not necessarily to fit in, not necessarily to be dignified, but just that passionate pursuit of who he is. So the second bit of today's message is about wide-eyed listening. Now, I wonder if you can tell me what's wrong with that phrase. Go on, shout it up. You don't listen with your eyes. Do you know, I've been preparing this for a couple of weeks. It took me like 3 weeks to realise that. To realise that, you know, wide-eyed listening is an odd phrase. But it's true, though, isn't it? That actually we do listen with our eyes. In fact, we listen with all of our senses. Because when we listen, we listen not just with our eyes, but we listen through what we're seeing, through what we're hearing, through what's going on around us. And last week, Phil was talking about playfulness. And he was talking about, he read out some lyrics and some words from films. And when you read those words, you could have just put them in a message on a Sunday morning, or you could have maybe even seen them in the Bible. You know, God is speaking to us through so many different ways. And so God is multisensory. He speaks to us through all of our senses, and God wants to speak to us. It wouldn't be much of a relationship, and it certainly wouldn't be a passionate relationship if you never spoke to somebody. There are days, I think, when my husband would quite like that. But you know what I'm saying? If we want a relationship with Jesus, he will want to speak to us, and we will want to listen. He speaks to us through so many different ways. He speaks to us, I hope he's speaking to you now. He speaks to us through worship, through reading the Bible, through other people, through road signs. When I was little and I had very little sleep, my children were little, I had very little sleep, very little time, God used to speak to me through children's books. I mean, who can't read Love You to the Moon and Back and not think about Jesus? You know, he used to speak to me through kids' books because he loves to speak to us. And I just want to encourage you to listen and really make that a priority in your lives. One time, we were thinking and praying about him doing a mission trip to Uganda. And that was going to cost because it would be self-funding. It was going to cost because he would be taking time out of his business and he's self-employed. He would take time out of the family. So we were asking God, is this something you want us to do? And Phil in particular was praying. And he went to his accountant and he was just chatting about it's probably end of year financy thing. And he was saying to the accountant, I'm not quite sure what to do. And the accountant handed him some money. He's not a Christian, this guy. Handed him some money and said, you are going to Uganda. Sometimes, thankfully, God speaks to us through unusual means, and at times when we're not able to hear him elsewhere in other ways, God will speak a direct word through an unexpected source. But I wanted to tell you about an incident I had many years ago when I was working. I was working as an occupational therapist in the community. And I went to visit a lady. And this lady was a university lecturer. She was a PhD, whatever. She was very clever. She was very, very clever. And she was a wonderful lady, but she had sustained an injury to her brain, and she was very physically disabled and had a lot of communication difficulties. It was really hard to understand her. So in order to understand her, in order to understand what I could help with and what she needed, I had to do three things. I had to be patient, but I had to tune in, and I had to listen in. I had to listen, and I had to tune in. So I would go and see her, and I would start the conversation, start the assessment, and I'm tuning in to how she's speaking, tuning in to the way that she spoke, because it was really hard for her to communicate. And I would listen, I would stay close, I would get close, and I would tune in. And this morning, as we were praying for the service, we were just praying, and Barry said, feel God has spoken to me. God has spoken to me about tuning in. And I was like, that's amazing, isn't it? Because that's what I want to talk about this morning, about how you have to tune in to God. And you were talking about the different frequencies, weren't you? And this is where he lost me, because I'm not musical. But about different frequencies and listening to the right frequency. Go for it, Barry, go. Yeah, just tell us quickly. Because when God speaks, you have to listen.
So, hello. So, frequencies, and, we all have frequencies, that's a fact, and God's creations, or everybody's got different frequencies. And there was the one main frequency in what I saw was like God's frequency, and then us wanting to jump into his frequency. But then further to that, when we get close to being in tune, it gets really uncomfortable. If you, like as a musician, if you're nearly in tune, that's worse than being totally out of tune. Really is. It's so uncomfortable. And even, people who don't realise that they're musicians, not non-musicians, people who don't realise, know there's something not quite right. And some people, sometimes, this carried on in my head afterwards. So sometimes, I'm nearly finished. So sometimes when you're really nearly in tune, and I'm guilty of this, and it's so uncomfortable, you're really nearly on the same wavelength as God, you think, never mind. And you kind of give up and just don't keep persevering. And then so I felt God was saying, just keep pushing through. It might be a week, it might be 2 months, it might be even longer of that uncomfortableness, but it's worth the fight, because eventually you'll get that one note where you're in tune with God.
That's fantastic. That is so good. So just needing to tune in. And we started the year by talking about dwelling in God. And so when I went to see this lady, I would have to lean in close to her because she didn't speak loudly. I had to lean in and I would have to tune in the way that she spoke. And it's the same, there's a language of heaven, and we need to learn to listen to how God is speaking to us. And one of the ways that can help with that is to ask God questions. It's okay to ask God questions. And I would challenge you to ask God questions, to ask him. I had a friend at our last church that when we had breakfast together, she would get the breakfast and she would ask God how many bread rolls to buy. I just love that. I love that. That's not me. I'm like, how many people are going to, well, I'm going to do this. Do you know, I'm working it all on my head. And so she would ask God, how many bread rolls shall I buy? And there was always enough bread rolls. There was always the exact amount of bread rolls. One time, I joined a gym. I didn't go to the gym. That's just wrong. I used the pool. I like to swim, moderately, gently swim. Anyway, so I joined this gym. I used to go at the same time most days, and I used to see the same people there. And I was thinking, how can I tell these people about Jesus? How can I? Because I'd go in and I'd go, morning. And then I'd carry on, eye contact, smile, morning. And then I'd carry on. It's like, how would you go from that to, would you like to know Jesus? So I'm swimming up and down one day, and I just said to God, how can I tell them about you? Now, the thing is, we've been talking about being adventurous and taking risks and living an adventurous life with God. The worry is he's going to ask us to do something we don't want to do. Is that the worry? That's the worry for me. So I asked God, how can I do this? And he said to me, tell them your name. Well, if God was in front of me, I'd kiss him. Because, you see, I can do that. I can tell people my name. He could have told me to do something he could have told me to stand up and preach at the back of the, at the gym or the pool. He told me to tell me my name. I'm like, yes, I can do that. So I finished my swim and I get in the sauna, and there's 2 people in the sauna. And they're talking, and I just said to them, oh, hello, wanted to introduce myself, I'm Janet. And they were like, oh, hello, I'm Jean, I'm Alan. So I sat down, sweating away. They're having this conversation. Jean stands up, she leaves. Nice to meet you, Janet, bye. And off she goes. So I'm left there in the sauna with this guy called Alan, and who's about 75, by the way, in case any of you are thinking there might be anything inappropriate. Oh dear. So Alan looks at me, and the first sentence that comes out of his mouth is this: I don't believe in God, I'm like, what just happened? Do I have talked to me about God tattooed on my head? Although I'm thinking that might be a good evangelical strategy, actually. I don't believe in God. So we started this conversation about Jesus. And actually, it was one of a few that we had in the sauna, sweating. But it was just that you ask Jesus a question, he answers. You follow out of obedience, and God comes. And you have an opportunity to talk to people about him. So, yeah, it was cool. Anyway, going back to my lady. So, one time I took with me a rep from a company. We were doing some technological something or other equipment to help her be more independent. So I take this rep. Now, this rep is an occupational therapist and should have known better. But he didn't tune in and he didn't lean in. And he struggled to understand what she was saying. And he looked to her husband and he just said to her, look, I'm struggling to understand you. Would it be okay if I communicated with your husband? Now, I hope we know that that's not the right way to talk to somebody who is struggling to communicate. And she looked at him and she said to him, no. And then she said, I want to speak. I want to speak. And it took her ages to say it. But it was really clear, I want to speak. And I stood there with my professional face on. She looks a bit like this, by the way. And I thought, oh, wow. And inside, I was just stood there like smiling and nodding. But inside, I was like, yeah, you go, girl. Don't let anybody take your voice. Don't let anybody stop you speaking. And this, I remembered this while I was praying for us this morning, and I just felt that it's so easy to let people take your passion. It's so easy to let people silence you and to stop speaking up and speaking out and being passionate and being a bit different and having an adventurous relationship with God and saying, what's next, God? It's so easy to stop. It's so easy to let people silence you. And I felt that God wanted to unsilence. I don't even know if that's a word, but I felt like God wanted to help people to move back into the passion. Have you got a passion or a dream that you used to have? Have you allowed other people to silence you? And is it time to discover again your passion, your uniqueness? So, who silenced you? Who is it? Or what is it that has stopped you or is holding you back from being passionate, from knowing God, stopping you being creative, stopping you being just who you are? And I got some images. I had this image in my head, and it was a person with like a sticking plaster over her mouth. So I Googled plaster over your mouth. It was a little bit distressing. I had all these images of people with plasters like over their mouths, and then people with masking tape over their mouths. It was really disturbing. I thought, I can't show one of those images in church. That's why we've got the emoji. It was really disturbing. And then I realised we have a passionate God, and he is disturbed as well. He is disturbed when we're silenced. He is disturbed when we're not creative and we're not passionate and we're not walking the way that he wants us to walk. So we're going to go into a time of worship. And I'm going to set you a couple of challenges for this week. So one challenge is to ask God a question. Ask him a question. It could be, how many loaves of bread shall I buy? No matter what your question is, ask him a question. If you're going to ask him a complex question, expect a complex answer. But ask him a question. That's my aim for this week, is to ask him a question. How do I approach this particular difficulty at work? What's going on with that person? They look sad. How can I help my children? How can I ask him a question? And my other challenge is ask somebody, what are you hearing God say this week? Because I am always really excited to hear what God is saying to other people. So ask somebody a question, ask them, what are you hearing God say? And let's just be really encouraged, and let's encourage each other to listen to God, to walk with God, and for his voice to rule our lives, and for his voice to bring us that encouragement that we need in walking with God.